At the end of the last video, we had just welcomed aboard my parents, who would be staying on Argo while we were attending a wedding in Italy. This time it was us returning to Argo and being welcomed aboard. And after just over a week touring Italy and attending a wedding, it really felt like we were coming home. Early the next morning, we got straight stuck into the list of jobs we had for Argo. The first one being installing the wind generator, which had been down for a service.
Where are you going?
Going into the sky.
It's going up there.
I'm going to separate.
Don't worry, it's not as tall as the other one.
What? Installing the wind generator, and this is the mizimar, so it is actually not that high compared to the main, and this is already too much height for me, but I will say a lovely view from up here. It was my first time going up the mast on Argo, and after a couple of hours we got the wind generator fixed and it started generating some power. We weren't really counting on it for too much energy, but for times like long distance sailing when we needed to use the autopilot, it would certainly come in handy. After changing a couple of light bulbs on the main mast, this time I sent my dad up, he's much lighter than I am. We took the afternoon to relax a bit and even took the dinghy out for a spin, exploring some of the beaches around. After another day of minor repairs and preparations, we untied the lines and set sail again, heading out of the Bay of Palma. It was some really lovely sailing at first, and although we had to tack our way out of the bay, we certainly didn't mind. It was really great initiation for my parents, who hadn't done a whole lot of sailing before.
I got this.
Threading the needle, and there's El Arenal and Mallorca behind us. But we have to tack our way up around that headland, which I think soon will be ready for tack. Nice. Towards the outer edge of the bay, however, the wind did really pick up and we were flying along. Eventually, looking at the time, we decided to motor a little bit so that we could go directly into the wind and make it to our first anchorage before nightfall.
Yeah.
We were considering a few different anchorages, but the one we opted for was one just outside the town of St. Jordi on the southeast coast of Mallorca. It had a really lovely beach, good protection, and was quite close to the town, which we wanted to check out. We anchored just before sunset and went for a swim. Despite it being a little windy throughout the night, the anchorage was actually really calm and peaceful, and after going to the beach the next day and seeing how beautiful it was, we opted to stay another night so we would have time to enjoy the beach and explore the nearby town. Very interestingly, along this pristine beach was a whole bunch of wartime bunkers. I'm not sure from which war, but they were kind of in really good condition, and I think some people had even snuck in at some point. In the late afternoon, we took our dinghy, otherwise known as Argo, into the town of St. Jordi. It was quite a good dinghy dock and rather safe, so we decided to walk around a bit and, of course, get some gelato. Buenos sabores, dice. A short walk along the waterfront brought us to the St. Jordi lighthouse. which had a really great view of the strait that separates the main part of Mallorca from Cabrera, which is an island just off the southeast of Mallorca. In a different time, I would love to go visit Cabrera by boat, but we just couldn't fit it into the schedule. After quite a bit of walking, we had to find a nice place along the waterfront to have some cocktails and a little bit of tapas before jumping back in the dinghy and heading to Argo for dinner. It was another really calm night in the anchorage, but it was time to move on, so we picked up anchor in the morning and headed for our next stop, which would be Portocolom. We had actually chosen Portocolom because I had arranged for a couple of mechanics to show me how to change the fuel filter on the main engine, and this was a good place because we could pick up a mooring buoy and do it in relative calm. We welcomed the mechanics aboard shortly after picking up a mooring buoy, and it was really great. Not only did they change the fuel filter, they showed me every step along the way, so I feel quite confident in doing it myself next time. In the afternoon, we took a swim around the boat and went out for a walk around the town. Portocolom is actually a really lovely fishing village and not at all run over by tourism. Apparently it got its name because there's a rumour that the famous explorer Christopher Columbus was actually born here, but none of that has been proven yet.
Alright, Mum, show us how you're making pancakes on a boat.
In the morning, Mum treated us to a pancake breakfast on board, which is really special. But before too long, we were sailing again, this time for Cala Varques. There is a plethora of lovely anchorages on Mallorca's east coast, but we chose Cala Varques because it seemed really protected for the winds of that day, and also it had a beach, caves, and it did not disappoint.
Check out this anchorage, Cala Varques. Beautiful turquoise water and a nice little beach up there.
We spent a long time swimming and exploring the caves and getting out of the way of the cliff jumpers that were making use of the overhanging cliffs into the pure blue waters.
Really cool.
After watching the rock jumping for several hours, I was just far too tempted and had to give it a go myself, although after a couple of times did not seem like a really great idea. In another inlet just around from the main beach, there's another set of caves. One of them has been completely hollowed out so you can pass all the way through it. It definitely felt like some kind of a treasure cave from the Pirates of the Caribbean or grotto from the Count of Monte Cristo. Our stand-up paddleboard is rated to take on the weight of 2 people, but that is easier said than done.
Get on!
Oh, go! You're ruining this beautiful video of this cave with your...
It is so hard to get over here.
Oh my god. Now we're not alone. Alright, check out this cave in Cala Varques. It's like a Captain Jack Sparrow treasure island cave. Can't go straight back to the boat, but yeah, we go back to the cave. Let's go back straight back to the cave.
Look, it looks like a face.
Oh, is it that?
The rock. Oh my god, it looks like a face. That one. The eye, the nose, the lips, and the brain.
It seems that I was very lucky in my jumping off the cliffs into the water without hurting myself, because as we returned to Argo, there was someone who had jumped off the cliff, fallen badly, and now had to get airlifted out of the Cala. The lifeguards had to clear the beach of everyone sunbaking and make a nice spot for the helicopter to land before picking up the unfortunate young bloke and taking him away. In the evening we took a walk up amongst the hills near the Cala and got a really great view of Argo and the surrounding Cala. Cala Varques was one of those anchorages we could have easily stayed at another night, but we had plans to move on to Menorca, so we were up early the next day, raising anchor and getting underway. You may have seen in previous videos that we actually bought Argo in Menorca before sailing it to Mallorca and Ibiza with our friends. This time we were returning to show my parents, but also because it's a really great place from which to cross to Sardinia. We were heading for Cala En Porter, which is actually the next anchorage over from where we stayed the last time. We started the crossing with some really nice sailing. Wasn't a whole lot of wind, but we still managed to make the most of it and averaged close to 6 knots. With not too much else to do, I decided to try my hand at fishing for the first time from Argo. This was not particularly successful, nor has it been particularly successful to date, but stay tuned, I'm determined to catch a fish before this season is out. Because we arrived to Cala En Porter quite late, we could only get a spot out at the entry of the Cala, where there was still a lot of swell around, so we did not have a great night at anchor. We still took the time to have a nice swim the next morning and explore some of the nearby rocks, but it wasn't too long before we were off heading for Mahón. We thought we'd try to get a marina to prepare for our 2-night crossing, but being peak season, the best we could do was a berth at this strange floating dock next to an island in the middle of the harbour. While it was a little bit cheaper than a normal marina, there was no electricity and a rather long dinghy ride to get into the town. So for us it was a little bit inconvenient, but it was the only thing that we could find to actually get ready for our crossing. By this point, Abril and myself had come to know Mahón quite well, so we were happy to show my parents all our favourite spots. The first night we were there, we had dinner in the form of tapas at the historic fish market, which had been converted into a dining courtyard with lots of different options for tapas. The next day we set my parents off to explore the city, while Abril and myself took care of some items for the boat, but also a secret item which included my mother's birthday present, which was coming up in a matter of days. For our last night before the crossing, and possibly last night before returning to Menorca, I had to go back to my favourite restaurant, El Trueno. You've got to try the anchovy and olive gildas and also La Brava's El Trueno. The town square was full of families enjoying the cool night air and lots of children excited to ride this carousel, which was powered by a guy riding a bike. Absolutely renewable energy.
Right, we're leaving Menorca, not for good, but for a long time, and heading out that way for Sardinia. It'll be 36 to 48 hours, we're going to see. But Mahón and Menorca, a very special place, because that's where we met Argo. That's where Argo was living, used to be our home.
We left Mahón at about midday and had planned to arrive in Sardinia on the second morning of our crossing.
Anyway, we are heading 73 degrees that way to Sardinia.
We chose to head for Alghero as it looked like a really nice town to start off with, and being in the north of the country, it was a good point from which to see the entire west coast from north to south.
Offshore safety reason, you feel secure?
In the evening of the first day, the wind had really started to pick up and we were taking precautions and sailing just with the jib and mizzen. We didn't realise it at the time, but this wind was the outskirts of a system that became famous as it came through and tore through a lot of boats in Formentera. The first night actually passed incredibly well. Abdil and I were on for most of the night shift, and we even ended up checking out a reef and making some really great time through the night. This, however, was one of the mistakes that led to us getting in a dangerous situation and shredding a lot of our sails.
I thought I'd take a moment to explain what happened with this squall that actually ended up being quite dangerous. Of course, we had more important things to do in the moment than pick up a video camera and start recording, so I'll walk you through it step by step. I think it's a really great learning example of what can happen when a series of seemingly non-consequential decisions are made that lead to something quite dangerous. So I just finished the night shift, and during which, as I just pointed out, we had shaken out a reef and were sailing with a full wardrobe of sails. That was kind of in itself not necessarily a bad decision. There were still very low breezes. But the error came when I decided to turn in and go down below to get some sleep. I had my parents and Abril up in the cockpit, helming the boat and keeping a lookout, and I explained to them, please wake me if there was anything that was concerning you. I did have Abril come down, I think about 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and mentioned that there was some, storm clouds on the horizon, but I was kind of half asleep and did not really kind of get the full picture. And I said, I'll give it another 20 minutes, and if it's getting closer, please let me know, and we'll bring some sails down. This went by. Still, the wind was relatively low, and it was the second time that she came down that I decided, okay, I need to go up and do something. In this moment, I went up, and the first thing I noticed for some reason was that the supporting wire for the back transom that was holding the dinghy had come loose, and so the dinghy was moving around considerably. And so for some reason, this is the first thing I went to try and fix, and as I was fixing and screwing that supporting wire back in, I noticed literally the squall heading our way. I screamed out to the others to turn on the engine and let's get up into the wind and bring the sails down. But by the time I was back in the cockpit, we were being hit by it. So I guess my learning point from there was, if I'm as a skipper going down below and there's not experienced enough people on watch, I need to put in a reef or two reefs, and just to make sure that we're going to be under control if something like that happens. The second mistake was not coming up immediately when Abdil told me there was some weather on the horizon. If I'd acted then, I wouldn't have put my family in a dangerous situation. And when the squall actually hit. I don't know for sure about the timing, but perhaps it would have been more beneficial timing to just head straight downwind rather than try to get up in the wind and put the sails down before it hit, because we were up into the wind when it did hit, and kind of made it that much more difficult to control. If there's any really experienced sailors out there, I would love to hear what you would have done in the same situation. After being heeled over and I think essentially knocked down for some time, we finally managed to get the jib in after it had been thrashed around. I finally managed to pull the main down, and by that point the winds had kind of dropped down a little bit, but the damage to the sails were already done and we were quite battered and bruised, and from there we had more control over the boat.
Well, here we are in the aftermath of the
Perfect storm.
That nearly capsized us. I mean, it's all looking good now. That on the front deck is the Genoa in tatters, just being lashed down. The main, it looks like it's in its lazy bag, but it's also in tatters. Mizzen not so bad, but yeah, currents and tatters. Mizzen has got some rips, but I think it's reputable. We have been beaten up and rinsed out, but Argo is intact. We are alive, and here comes some more rain. We managed to replace the Genoa with our spare jib, but did not have enough time to replace the main sail with the spare before sunset. For this reason, we had to motor on. How do you feel after just waking up? The second night passage in a row. And here's the end of Alghero. We were very tired and a little bruised and battered, but still very excited to drop anchor just outside Alghero. We found a pretty good spot on the north side of the marina that was reasonably protected, and it was just a 5-minute dinghy ride into the marina to get to town. There was no discernible dinghy dock that we could see, but we put it in the corner and no one seemed to mind. Alghero is a beautiful city with an ancient city wall and cobblestone streets all throughout the centre. I was also very surprised to discover that there is actually a huge Catalan influence on Alghero. We were all very interested in the history and maybe visiting some churches, but after a 2-day crossing, Mum was on a mission and we had to find gelato ASAP. After a couple of hours of wandering around the city, I started to notice that the sky was looking rather menacing. After just having been beaten up in a squall a day earlier, I was very keen to get back to Argo and make sure the anchor was holding. My mother's birthday was the next morning, and after gifts and some breakfast, we went out to explore Alghero again, this time checking out some of the more historic stuff. We checked out some replica catapults on the ancient city wall and went in search of the Cathedral of Alghero because we were really intrigued by its multicolored dome. Unfortunately, it was closed on the day, so we couldn't get in to take a closer look. In celebration of my mother's birthday, we went to a lovely sunset spot on the ancient city wall where we could order drinks from a local bar and sit on the wall to watch the sunset. We had an incredible meal with a lot of seafood, a lot of it cooked in a local herb called myrtle. It was a little bit blustery the next day, but we decided to continue on with our plans to head south. There were a few options for anchorages that we could make before sunset, and we ended up choosing Porto Mandriola. It turned out to be not quite the best choice, but we were safe at anchor there nonetheless. Porto Mandriola is protected by Cape Manu, which is actually a very popular spot for surfers of all things. I didn't think there would be a really top surf spot in Sardinia, but there you go. The wind continued to blow very hard the next day, and with some really big seas, we had to stay one extra night here, even though we weren't really enjoying the anchorage. The next day we were really happy to get some more favourable winds, and we were off. By this point, of course, we had replaced the damaged sails with our spares. One of the top spots on my Sardinia west coast hit list was the archaeological site of Tharros, which was just a few hours sail south. Finally, some semi-nice sailing weather. So we're going from Porto Mandriola to the archaeological site of Tharros. Get some history in us. Look at this new old sail with the original M46 on it. Pretty smart looking, if you ask me. Just alongside the archaeological site, there are a whole bunch of mooring buoys. Some reviews said that they were paid, and others said that they were complimentary. With a little bit of research, we happened to find that you did have to pay for them with an online payment portal that didn't work. One thing was finding a mooring buoy with the perfect view of the archaeological site, but another was finding out where we could take the dinghy in order to visit the archaeological site. After a folly of a dinghy ride up and down the peninsula, in which an unnamed skipper got confused between north and south, we managed to find a dinghy dock in the northwest corner of the bay where we could safely leave Argo while we visited the archaeological site. It was a bit of a walk from the dinghy dock to the archaeological site, but we could not fault the view. We thought we'd get the hard part out of the way by climbing first to the Torre de San Giovanni di Sinis before checking out the archaeological site. After the first glute workout that I've had in a while, we were rewarded with a view over the archaeological site and, of course, the bay with Argo anchored down below. The archaeological site was absolutely fascinating, but to be honest, we could have done with a bit more of a layout or a bit more information about how the town was set up. The first long-lasting structures here were built by the Phoenicians, but of course it ended up changing hands to the Romans, who built thermal baths and a whole lot of other infrastructure, including this road up to the top of the hill. On the way back, we stumbled upon a historic bonus track with the Church of San Giovanni di Sinis, whose foundations were first laid during the Byzantine era in the 6th century. We were back on Argo with enough time to host the first ever blues jam session on board Argo, with my dad playing on guitar here. I think I've mentioned this before, but as much as we love the interior of Argo, we do want to make some changes that will allow us to use our creative instruments a bit more. So that, for me, that's the keyboard and the guitar, and for Avril, her sewing machine and other creative tools. Speaking of which, while we were jamming, Avril was busy working away too. With the archaeological site of Tharros ticked off the list, we were rounding the Cap de San Marco and heading south along the Sardinian coast. We were tossing up between getting a marina or finding an anchorage somewhere in the southwest, probably on the Isola de San Pietro. After discovering the prices for the marina, we decided to bypass it and head down to the south of the Isola where we found a well-protected bay with a few other yachts in it. The next morning we found only a little bit of wind in the strait, but as soon as we got far enough south, we enjoyed some really great downwind sailing and averaging over 7 knots most of the way. We were headed for a large bay in the south of Sardinia, where I spied quite a few different anchorages that looked really nice and looked like good swimming. We ended up in one called Spiaggia degli Americani. When we arrived, the wind was still blowing up towards 25 knots, so it took a couple of attempts before I was happy with the holding of the anchor. The morning brought a very different scene, with the wind gone, sun out, and perfect beach weather. We spent several hours on the beach and swimming around the boat and swimming to and from the beach as the water was too good to take the dinghy. We really love the beach, the water, and the atmosphere of Spiaggia degli Americani. We literally had to tear ourselves away to move on to Cagliari. It started off with some relatively slow but consistent sailing. It was really nice heading out of the bay and heading east along the Sardinian south coast. Navigating through the Bay of Cagliari put us on our toes a bit because there were so many ships coming in and out, and quite a few at anchor, like this one. We booked a marina that was very much in the centre of town, but we didn't realise how close to the centre of town until we actually pulled up. After tying up and hosing the boat down, we went straight out to have the first of many delicious meals we had out in Cagliari. This being the first marina since being hit by that squall on the crossing, I took the opportunity to lay the Genoa out on the dock and investigate the full extent of the damage. It did not look good. While I was confident that the main could be fully repaired and the mizzen only had a couple of minor tears in it, this was a different question. Definitely not sure whether this Genoa would fly again. We did a little bit of sightseeing and a little bit of boat work, but to be honest, most of our time in Cagliari revolved around food, including these delicious focaccias that we got to take away and eat on the deck. Because our plan was to escape the Schengen zone and head to Tunisia, we had to go and get checked out of the country. Easier said than done. After walking to the Coast Guard to get the boat checked out, they told us to come back in the afternoon, but we begged and had them process us there on the spot. But we were running late, so we had to get an Uber back to the port to go to the port police. Unfortunately, we did not make it there in time before they went on their siesta break, so we had to come back later again. And by this point, it was way too late to depart for Tunisia, so we had to stay another night. The upside to this, take away a Sardinian seafood in the cockpit for dinner. Because we were already technically checked out of the country, we took our time and departed in the late morning. At 120 nautical miles, this crossing was a considerable amount shorter than our last and only required 1 night at sea. We left the Bay of Cagliari this time with some other sailboats, but always keeping a lookout for those container ships that kept on coming in and out. Leaving the Sardinian south coast, we were a little bit concerned about this weather coming through, but it turned out to be only rain and not really any wind in it. So the rest of the evening was spent pretty much at ease as we went into the night. At the end of our night shift, we caught this beautiful sunrise near the coast of Tunisia, and of course it was time to put up the Q flag and our Tunisian courtesy flag. We cruised along the Tunisian coast into Bizerte for a couple of hours, and I couldn't help but thinking how cool it was that not only had we crossed into a different country, but a different continent. We had heard some horror stories and were fully prepared to wait several hours for our check-in into Tunisia, but surprisingly things went relatively smoothly and we only had to wait at the dock for an hour or so while we got processed. In the next video, Avril and I are cruising and exploring all that the lesser-known sailing destination of Tunisia has to offer. So please like and most importantly subscribe so you can join us next time for some Roman ruins, Arab Medinas and some unique cruising.